Can you confirm the date this happened and what you were doing traveling to the US and on what visa you were traveling?
But I was traveling to the United States for a 2 week period to see friends. I was traveling on an ESTA visa waiver, which is the visa that tourists travel on. I wasn't going for work. I was only going for a holiday. So I had not applied for a tourist visa or a student visa, which I had been on previously. And previously, I had also been on an E3 visa, which is a visa just for Australian workers. All to say that I've been on a lot of visas in the past. This time, just the visa waiver.
And you're an Australian citizen.
I'm an Australian citizen. I had lived in the United States for about 6 years before this incident happened.
Had you ever been stopped or questioned at the US border before?
I'd had, friction with US border guards, but I'd never had anything like this. One time on my F1 student visa, I needed a particular piece of paper, but they just called through to the student office at my university and I passed on through. This was the first time anything like this had happened.
Did you expect this to happen, or what did you do to prepare for your trip to the US?
Like a lot of Australians, we've had a lot of media in the last few months about tourists and travelers getting stopped at the border. So I had some sense that it was worth being careful. I had deleted sensitive content from my phone, pictures, various texts. I had completely deleted my Signal app, but I had not chosen to do, what someone going in a working capacity as a journalist might do, which is take a burner phone. And I had decided to do that because I was worried that a burner phone would provoke even more suspicion at the border. I was prepared for a situation where an ad hoc search at the primary processing interview might create some problems and cause some delay as to my entry into the country. I was not prepared for what actually happened, which was me being pulled out of the line as soon as I stepped off the plane, them having pre-prepared for my arrival in the country and for my denial of entry.
What were your trepidations about the possibility of even being stopped at the border?
Look, for all the time that I've lived in the US, crossing the US border has never been fun. It's not good for anyone. There's always a risk that you're going to be caught up in the arbitrary and capricious bureaucratic machine that is the Department of Homeland Security. But because I had been at Columbia when the Palestinian protest broke out, and because I had written about it online, I was anxious that I might be subject to increased scrutiny. And so for that reason, I had also taken the particular posts that I had written about the protests down from the internet in preparation for my travel. It turns out they had already read them before I took them down, at least 72 hours before I got on the plane.
When did you take them down?
I think I took them down about 72 hours before I departed. So when they told me that the posts were the reason that I was detained, I knew that they had been doing sweeps of my information a long time before I boarded the flight.
At what point did you realize they had flagged you?
I got off the plane, was immediately before I even got into the passport line, I was immediately pulled into secondary processing. My phone was taken from me. My passcode was demanded on threat of deportation. And I was told there and then that the reason that I was being targeted was because of what I had written online about the protests at Columbia University. Because I took that information down from the internet days before I got on the plane, I knew that they had been waiting for me when I got off the plane. I knew this wasn't random. I knew that I was specifically targeted by Customs and Border Protection.
What was going through your head at that moment?
Uh, I was I was pretty panicked um, because I had planned for one eventuality, which I thought was much more likely. This targeted, deliberate, and quite intimidating approach, like really threw me. I was trying to keep a sense of self, trying to keep focused and not panic. But when you get pulled immediately into a detention holding cell, and interrogations after a 15-hour flight begin, and you're interrogated about your political beliefs, it's a high stress situation. And I was fatigued and fearful.
What sort of questions were they asking you?
As soon as they sat down, they said, "We both know why you're here. It's because of what you wrote online about the protests." And then what followed were questions about the protests, about what students I had interacted with, where I was getting my information, what WhatsApp groups I was a part of, but also much broader questions about what I thought about it all, referring to the Israel-Palestine conflict or genocide, however you might put it, and how I might solve the situation. So had this farcical encounter with the border guard asking what I thought about a one versus two state solution, for example. You don't expect when you get off a 15-hour flight to have to give your view on how you would solve Israel's occupation of Gaza, but that's what I was asked.
And they had asked for your reporting materials, or
They were asking, I believe, me to give up contacts in the student protest movement. Now, I didn't have contacts in the student protest movement. I was participating as a student journalist. I was a nonfiction writing student at Columbia when the protests broke out. I stepped down out of my classroom to watch it happen. And as I thought was incumbent upon me as a writer, I began writing down what I saw in front of me. I wasn't involved in the organizing. I was certainly present at many protests, but I saw myself there first and foremost as a journalist and as a writer. I did not see myself as an activist. That distinction was not of interest to Customs and Border Protection.
how did you respond to their line of questioning?
I was trying to be polite, amiable, conciliatory. Um, I was trying to be compliant. I regret that now. But what I told them was what I believe about the situation, which is that it can and must be brought to an end by the dominant power in the situation, which is to say Israel. I told them that I believe Hamas is a terrorist organization. Um, Nonetheless, the lack of divisiveness, in my view, did not seem to placate them.
Did you feel pressured to answer questions in a certain way that they wanted you to?
The interrogation began with this quite friendly overture from the officer. There was a lot of suggestion that, oh, we'll just ask a few questions and then we'll get you on your way. I now believe I was never going to make it through that interview. My answers, as I've just described, were not particularly radical. They were certainly not out of line with many Americans or certainly any Australians. But this friendly, amiable posture from the border guards was designed to get me to self-incriminate. They were trying to get me to be as forthcoming as possible so that they would have grounds through which they could deny me entry. And I think they became increasingly frustrated with my answers because they couldn't find what they thought they were going to find. They seemed to have a picture in their mind of journalists and of student protesters as terrorists, anti-Semites, people interested in political violence. And to hear my answers, I think was disappointing to them and strange and out of line with their picture of the world.
What material do you think they were looking for in your phone?
They were looking for, first and foremost, evidence in my phone of anti-Semitic or violent rhetoric that was obviously not present in my phone. They were looking for evidence of extremism, of terrorism, that obviously was not present in my phone. And when they failed to come across those things, they started looking for contacts to other student protesters, people in political organizations. When they failed to find that, I think they went looking for other reasons to deport me, and they went looking for evidence of drug use.
How long had they been going through your phone?
The first interrogation went for 2 hours, with breaks in between when they would disappear into the back room and run my phone through software. I had given them the passcode to my phone, because they said that if I didn't, I would immediately be deported. And I believed them naively and wrongly when they said, "Oh, we'll let you in, as soon as this is done." That was my mistake, and I regret it. What I should have done is accepted immediate deportation, as they said that they would do. So they plugged my phone, as I understand it, in the back room into software, which scanned it for sensitive messages, keywords perhaps. And that was going on for an hour or two. After some time, after they had moved through the political part of the interrogation, the guard came out of the back room triumphantly and then told me, without showing me the evidence, that they had found evidence on my phone of drug use. And under fatigue, under stress, under pressure, not wanting to be found lying, I started to imagine all sorts of evidence that could be on my phone that I certainly now know was not on my phone. And I conceded to them that I had consumed drugs in the past. Not least in New York City, I had bought weed gummies, which are legal in New York State, but illegal federally. And I had not declared that on my ESTA visa. This, is grounds for denial of entry.
Is that what they ultimately used to justify your deportation?
Well, they never gave me the reason for my deportation. They never gave me paperwork. They never provided grounds. If you contact them today, they will deny that they ever stopped me because of my political beliefs, and they will tell you that the reason I was denied entry was because I had defrauded them by failing to admit to past drug use. It's quite clear to me that this is a strategy of finding a pretext for a denial of entry, a pretext where political speech is the true reason, but whether or not someone has smoked weed in the past is the pretextual reason for denial of entry.
Especially given that the first thing they mentioned was your writing.
I want to be really explicit about this. The sequence of events was I was pulled out of the line before I even got to passport control. I was immediately taken into detention. I was immediately told explicitly and proudly that the reason I was targeted was because of my writing on the conflict. I was interrogated on my political beliefs for 45 minutes. And then and only then did the guard's attention turn to whether or not I had smoked weed in the past. This is why I'm confident that the drug use was used as pretext to deny me entry for having views and having expressed views that the US government does not want to hear.
How long in total were you detained for?
I was detained for 12 hours. I was put on a flight later that evening back to Australia, another 15-hour flight. I was interrogated twice during that time, each for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I spent the other 8 hours when not being interrogated in the detention holding cell at the basement of LAX, which other travelers unfortunately may know. A cold windowless room with a series of cots and some blankets to try to keep yourself warm. waiting out the time until my flight came.
And you weren't able to call your family back home to let them know.
No, after the second interrogation, which happened 6 hours into my detention, I was then told that I had the right to call my consulate. I, because I previously had figured out that I must have rights to a phone call and had badgered the guards until they allowed me to call my consulate. So I did so at about the 4 hour mark. On the phone to the Australian consulate, the Australian consulate worker very kindly told me everything was going to be okay, that I most likely would be put on a plane back home in about 12 hours. And if I was able to remember any phone numbers of family or friends, she would be able to call them on my behalf. You have to remember, you have to have these phone numbers memorized because, of course, all of your devices and all of your materials are taken from you by the US border guards. So my advice to anyone crossing the US border is have phone numbers memorized of who you might want your consulate to call to protect you.
What other advice would you have for anyone stopped at the US border?
I've got quite a lot of advice. The first thing I would say is that if you're crossing the US border and you are just remotely worried that you might be targeted because of your political speech, do take a device that has been scrubbed of all material and accept the likelihood that you won't be allowed into the country. If and when they ask for your device and for your passcode, accept immediate deportation rather than allow yourself to be forensically searched. Have cash on you, because if you are detained, the best way to get food is with cash. You won't have devices to pay and you won't have access to your credit card. My best advice is be ready to accept deportation and don't be sure that you're going to get into the country.
What devices did they seize from you, and which ones did they look through?
They seized my laptop and my phone. They searched only my phone. It seems that the border guards think that a phone is sufficient. And ultimately, what the border guards are looking for is grounds to justify to their own superior officer your deportation. They're not looking to build a case or anything. They just want something to put on file. So the phone is the place where they think they're going to get the best evidence to get you to admit, for example, to having consumed weed in the past. Yeah, for that reason, take a burner phone, or at the very least, take a phone that has been very highly scrubbed and never let them have access to it.
So was the first interview focused primarily on your writing, and the second one was focused on your potential drug use in the US?
Actually, the interviews were identical. They're conducted by two different officers. They will do the first one, then they'll make a recommendation for your detention. Then they'll do the second interview following exactly the same framework, just to dot the I's and cross the T's and ensure that they're doing the right thing by deporting you. The first interview, which went for nearly 2 hours, was broken in my mind into two sections: the political and then the pretextual, the drug use. And it was the first 45 minutes of that interview, and then later the second interview, which were about my politics.
So they had claimed they found evidence of you using marijuana on your phone.
What they said specifically was, Mr. Kitchen, in our search of your phone, we found evidence of drug use. What can you tell us about that? And I then conceded to them that I had consumed marijuana in the United States and other drugs in other countries. I should never have conceded anything because I don't believe that they had evidence on their phone, but they were using a tactic of entrapment. That is, sitting here today, I feel naive and embarrassed to have fallen into the trap. But I have to remember that I was jet lagged, fatigued, stressed, and intimidated. And I still believed, wrongly, that these were reasonable people who, once they saw that I was a student writer, would let me into the country.
How did this experience affect you personally and professionally? How has it changed how you approach your work, if at all?
It has changed how I approach my work. I have been hardened in my political views. I am much more determined than I have ever been to write clearly and honestly and ferociously about the protest movement, about what we are seeing in the genocide of the Palestinian people. To that extent, I think that this policy of the US government is having the opposite effect of what it might be intended to. They were seeking to create and are seeking to create a climate of silence. They're seeking to intimidate writers and journalists. In my particular case, they no longer have anything over me because it seems that I'm already banned from the United States. And I now feel, at the very least, angered, but also liberated to talk clearly about the things that we're all seeing.
How has your perspective of press freedoms and the First Amendment in the United States changed as a result of what you experienced?
It's pretty clear to me that the First Amendment protections, it's pretty clear to me that the First Amendment protections of journalists and non-citizens are not nearly as firm as we like to believe. That's especially true of people who are at the US border. When you get off the plane and before you step over the line past passport control, you are not protected by the Constitution or those First Amendment grounds. That means that the government has an incentive to keep you away from stepping onto US soil. Because once you do, becomes much more difficult for them to police your speech. It's a position of great precarity that journalists and writers are put in when they're trying to enter the country. Um, and I'm glad, very glad that the First Amendment is there to protect people. But we see, even once people are on the inside of the country, that the state and its allies have ways of silencing and intimidating people who speak out. Not least, the threat of deportation for people who are already on the inside, as we saw with Mahmoud Khalil, um, and uh, and as we've seen with a range of student protesters in the last few months.
In your New Yorker column, you wrote, I was targeted for writing honestly about what was in front of me, the same thing I'm doing now. That is worth the price. Why is it so important to continue exercising that right and to protect freedom of speech more broadly?
If I were to stop writing, if I were to do what I was very tempted to do, which is crawl into a hole and not ever talk to the media again, I would be making the desires of the US government come true. I would be doing exactly what they hoped. Um, what they want more than anything, what this administration wants more than anything, is for opposition to die down under a climate of fear. And I'm not willing to allow that to happen, because doing so would be to sacrifice all the things that I hold dear in the United States and in the country where I come from, Australia. It is only through a vibrant and loud public space in which journalists and non-journalists are able to express their views freely without the threat of intimidation that a democracy can survive. And I believe we're in a period of great democratic backslide, and the assaults on journalists, the assaults on writers are part of that democratic instability.
How have you processed your experience and the emotional turmoil of what you went through and how did it feel to be finally on a plane back to Australia?
I'm not sure that I have processed the emotional turmoil, um, but uh, what happened was that I landed back in Australia and I was so relieved to be among my own people. I love the US. I've lived there for 6 years, but to be in my own country, protected by my own laws and my own state, was a great relief. I will say that I have since flown overseas again. I boarded a plane and flew to Europe recently. And getting on that plane uh, was really challenging. Um, it was quite scary. I knew I had no reason to be afraid, but I felt in my body a great deal of stress and panic. And I think it's going to be some time before I feel fully comfortable moving across borders again.
Anything else that I didn't ask you that you want to make sure you mention?
I think you covered it all. I think I'll just reiterate, if I haven't said it already, that that we have already seen and we will see a lot more of these attempts by the state to silence people. And they are able, first and foremost, to go for the least protected people, which is to say non-citizens. Those people are at their most vulnerable on the far side of the US border. But I think we've already seen clear signs from the Trump administration that it would like to make its way up the chain, um, putting pressure on, silencing, and removing voices that it disagrees with, who might currently be protected by citizen status. And it is only by intervening early and often and protecting people like Mahmoud Khalil that we can protect US citizens from these incursions on free speech. Um, we're not, no one is safe until we're all safe. And we should start with people who are being deported by ICE and the Department of Homeland Security.
Thank you. I want to say thank you for taking the time and speaking about your experience.